Alright, so hopefully you guys are familiar with the FUR report. That's the footwear industry report. That's what we've been looking at. That has all of the results. The competitive advantages has three screens, but the most important one is this first one. That's the one that has the quadrants for each region. So if I want to see, because you can really have different strategies for different regions, and for the most part, we did have two different type of strategies. And if we go into year 15, you'll see that in North America, we were over in this quadrant, while in Latin America, typically we would be more over here. Let's see if we go to a different year. Yeah, you'll see that in year 16 in Latin America, we were doing high-end, low model. And we probably did the same for Europe. Yeah. But for North America, we were over here. And that was just because of the size of our factories. We have big factories in North America and Asia, and smaller factories in Europe and Latin America. So in order to utilize our full capacity in all of these factories, we employed two different types of strategies for the most part each year. If you go down to our company operating reports and go to production and workforce, it'll actually give you a snapshot all on one page of what we did in each region. So North America, how many we sold at what SQ rating, and how many models we produced. So we went from 500 in Europe, and in Latin America it was 300, and branded was 500. How it basically works is that the more models you produce, the greater demand you have. And that will bring us back up to all of the decision entry screens. Really the most important screen that you're trying to really look at is the distribution screen. All the other screens really drive this screen. If you call it, this was the first screen that I took on when we divided up the screens, was the production screen, production and distribution. But what I soon found is that everything drives this screen. Any changes on, almost including even the corporate citizenship, changing something on the corporate citizenship. Let's say you're going to increase this, and now you're going to increase the charity and energy efficiency. They actually all impact our bottom line. It impacts our operating profit margin, which impacts what we are preparing to be shipped. And the numbers that we're trying to meet is this right here. We're trying to create demand, and we're trying to meet that demand. So this is the projected demand. This is really the first thing I would look at every year. It says our projected demand is just over 4,000. Latin America is 4,800. That's really risen through the years, because it used to be only about, in the early years this was around 2,000 at the most, but every year all of these would go up. But this is what you're trying to meet, and this is what this number here, which is pairs available, this is what you're producing. And then this is what your surplus or shortfall. It's a shortfall if it's a minus. So you don't want to have too many, and you don't want to have a shortfall. You want this number to be less than 200. So anywhere from maybe 50 to like 175 is generally what I would shoot for. But those numbers can be changed by a lot of different ways. If you go into the branded pair screen, this is telling you what type of shoe you are going to create. Are you going to use superior materials or standard materials? The higher grade of material, it actually will increase demand. So our demand right here is 4,089 and our surplus is 604. Well, this surplus is too much. So maybe one of the things we can do is drop down demand. So if I materials. So let's say I drop down the materials all the way to 10%. I go back over to distribution, and you'll see that the projected demand decreased. Let's say we go back over, and now we take away the enhanced styling, and that all of this is lowering our SQ. So as our SQ rating goes down, so does our demand, our projected demand. So our demand now is down to 3,700, and our surplus keeps rising. So that's not a good thing. Now, how about the number of models? Let's take a look at Europe. If I decrease the models to 50 models, okay, leave everything else the same, you see that the star rating is still high. But when I go to distribution, the demand decreases. So the number of models that you create has a direct effect on demand, which is why in the final year we went 500 across all regions, because you were trying to hurt Team B. You were trying to take away some of Team B's sales. So we increased everything from 50 to 500 to increase our projected demand. And of course, by increasing our projected demand, we needed shoes, so we took shoes that we were normally selling in private label and we moved them into the wholesale market. But there are other ways to affect demand. Wholesale and internet marketing, the screens are basically the same. They work in tandem. And this is the price that you're going to sell for each shoe. And here's the demand. Right here, you'll see 982 is the projected surplus or shortfall. If I go over to distribution, you'll see that the 982 is the same thing. So it's on the same screen. So I go to wholesale, and I can see right on this screen that I have a surplus of 982. Now if I increase my price, you'll see that that number will actually go up. See, it's now up to 1148. So we're going in the wrong direction. So if I lower the price, lowering the price increases the demand. The cheaper it is, the more people are going to buy them. So let's say 193 is a pretty good number to shoot for. It's under 200. But of course, by lowering the price, our overall profit margin decreases. So if I increase price, profit margin goes up. Decrease price, profit margin goes down. And generally, I would stay above 20% in the profit margin. And you'll see, if you look back at some of our rivals, they'll have profit margins like 6% because they probably were not paying attention to their profit margins at all. They were probably just trying to meet demand, and they priced their shoes to meet demand, make sure everything equaled out, but they weren't looking to see if they were making any money. So it's not just about creating shoes and meeting demand. You want to make a profit. And this is really how we, especially in the early years, this is how we were winning. Because I think we were the only team paying attention to actually trying to make some money. Especially when there were crazy exchange rates. There were times when the exchange rates were so crazy that we were being a negative in this area. I remember Latin America, I think it was year 13, we were negative over here. So we had to get real creative in order to bring up our profit margin in this area. Brand advertising is actually the cheapest way. That's why you see us spending so much money here. Is the cheapest way to create demand. The more you advertise, the more demand that you get. What we found out is that if you have a celebrity, if you have celebrity power, that number is, whatever number you have here is multiplied with your celebrity appeal. So we have 0 celebrity appeal this year. So that's why we had to spend a lot of money in all of these areas in order to get our demand up. Whereas Team B didn't have to do that. If you look at Team B for North America, they spent $15,500. We spent twice as much money, but their demand was much higher, and that was because of their celebrity appeal and brand reputation. And if you look at year 19, it even got more pronounced, because they really kind of built up on their brand reputation. And they also spent a lot of money on charities and citizenship. If you notice that they won 2 or 3 years in a row for their awards. So they invested a lot of money in corporate citizenship and celebrity endorsements. And while it was killing them in the middle years, it really started to pay off for them towards the end. So I don't know if that was by luck or they knew what they were doing, but it definitely started to pay off, because as you can see, their projected demand was 43.82 and ours was only 16.85. So they walked away with 24% of the market share. So that was pretty crazy, and that was really, and they spent less money on almost everything. They only offered $3 rebates. They did spend money there too in delivery time, which they probably didn't need to. They probably could have backed off on a lot of these areas. In fact, that's what they should have done. They should have spent less in all of these areas, because they were spending so much on celebrity appeal. They could have backed off in other areas, and they could have had a higher profit margin. But I'm not sure that they completely understood. They didn't need to have a 9.0 star rating, especially towards the end. If they had backed off on these areas and increased their profit margins, they would have had a better shot at beating us. So other ways to increase demand is to increase mail-in rebates. The more you offer mail-in rebate, it increases demand, but there's a diminishing return, and you kind of have to play with these numbers to see at what point it's not really giving you, that you're paying too much for the demand. And the same goes for delivery time. You can increase the delivery time, it might increase demand, but it's very expensive. So if I go from 2 weeks to 1 week, it gets pretty costly. And 1 week also, you also have to have more in required inventory. As you can see, the required inventory is 700, but if I say drop that to 3 week delivery time, I go back to the distribution screen, and you'll see that the required inventory on hand is much less. So if you want more pairs in your production, you want to have less delivery time. And that's one of the things I did in the final year. I wanted more pairs to be sold rather than having them sit in a warehouse. So that's why we did not do the 1 week. We did 2 week delivery across the board, which also gives us more cash on hand, because delivery time's expensive. Retailer support. Retailer support is expensive. We generally wanted to be more than what the average is. The average retailer support was $27.50, so I always tried to be above whatever the overall average was. And all that really means is if you go back to competitive intelligence, here's the retailer support. So if we invested $3,000 in retailer support, it affects how many outlets, how many stores are actually selling our shoes. In this case, in year 19, this is one of the things that hurt us, because if you look at Team B, they invested $5,000, yet they had retail outlets of over 5,000, and that was because of their celebrity appeal. If you look at one of our early years, so we invested 5,500, but we had 28, which actually was more than anyone else. So you want to have a good amount of retailer outlets, because those are all the stores that are selling your shoes. Let's see if there's anything else on the screen. When you go up in price, at some point you're going to have a little red thing that comes up. See here that all this red means is that your internet price is too low. They want you to have a 40% markup on any shoes that you're selling on the internet. So I'd always have to make sure that there was 40% or more. In some cases, I would actually sell more than 40%, depending on the reason. So over here I could jack up the price to 45% over the wholesale price if I wanted to. So the price between these two had to be 40% apart, or you would get a red mark letting you know that there would be a problem. And internet marketing just has really two options: advertising and free shipping. In most cases, we didn't do the free shipping, but in the final year, I think I offered it across the board just to try and increase demand. Again, we were trying to eat into Company B and their profits, which actually worked, because if you see here that's year 12, but if you go to year 20, we actually did pretty well. In fact, overall, here's your overall snapshot here somewhere. Financial, that was in the financial. You'll see in internet, our revenues were 450 million, and Team B was 397. And Team E actually did help us win as well, because they went big after the celebrities. If you notice that they were the other team, I think that was pretty big, and they took a huge chunk of the sales. So they ate into Company B as well, which really just helped us. We need someone to help us take them down, take a piece of their pie. If you're not sure how all of these numbers work, these numbers come from the branded production screen right down here. This number 5,000 comes from the production. This is our production facility screen. Production facility. These are our factories. So this is the space available that we have in each region. So we have a 5,000 pair facility in North America and 4,000 pair facility in Latin America, and so on. The number under here is what equipment we have. This is something that all the other teams really took a long time catching up to. I'm not sure that they all really came close to what they should have been, but if you have 5,000 square feet factory in North America, let's say, you don't want to have just equipment for 2,000. This is factory equipment. So if I only had 2,000 factory equipment, that means just 3,000 pair of space that's just sitting there doing nothing. So you really want these two numbers to match, because that means you're working at full capacity. And for a long time there, we were the only company that was doing that. In the FUR report on page 4, industry overview, it actually tells you facility space and production equipment. So if I go back to year 16, you'll see that the only team that looks like that they're really starting to build towards it is Team B. As you can see, they really started to figure out. They had 19,000 pair space, factory space. And that was across all 4 regions. But their equipment was 18,000. It was only 1,000 less, so that's not too bad. As you can see, we had 18 and we had 18. But if you look at everybody else, like Team A, this is expensive, paying for all this space. Space is more expensive than equipment, really. So they're spending all this money for all this space, but they only have equipment for, what, a fifth? I mean, they were getting killed just on their own balance sheets for this. They had unused space. Team F, 24,000, yet they only had equipment for 12. 22,000, yet they only had equipment for 9. That makes no sense. And you can see all the companies except for Team B and Team D were really utilizing all of their factory space. What's the sense of paying all this money for all this space? So whoever has rival analysis, you really want to focus, go through the years and really kind of take a look at the companies that were spending smartly. some of these companies were just not spending very smartly. One of the things that we did over time in our factories, see here, these screens right here, these options right here are for selling existing equipment and purchasing. You can purchase new equipment or refurbished equipment. So purchasing refurbished equipment, right now we're at full capacity, so it says 0. But let's say I'm going to sell off 2,000 pairs of equipment. That'll allow me to do this. Buying refurbished equipment is cheaper than new equipment. So in the early years when we didn't have a lot of money, down here it tells you how much it costs. So you could, if you wanted to see what your costs were for purchasing equipment, it was always down at the bottom here. New equipment costs considerably more than refurbished. So we started off purchasing refurbished equipment when we didn't have a lot of cash money. But I want to say by year 15, year 16, we were bringing in so much cash that I started to trade out our refurbished equipment, which all I did was I would sell 1,000 of our equipment. And how this works is it sells the oldest equipment first. So it was selling all of the refurbished equipment that we had purchased. In fact, it would actually tell you right down here percentage of new versus refurbished. So over here it would say like 10% new, 90% refurbished. And that was pretty much across the board. Most of our factories had mostly refurbished equipment. So over the span of about 3 years, I want to say, I changed it all over. And by year 16, year 17, every factory was running at 100% new equipment. And we were able to do that because we were bringing in a lot of cash. And I actually even stopped really taking loans out by year 15, year 16, because we were just making so much cash. I just put it right back into our factories. And by increasing our factories, that affected our output. The projected workforce productivity, all of these numbers went up as we went from refurbished factory equipment to new factory equipment. Because if you look into the help files, it'll give you a breakdown of how new equipment, it's just faster for the employees to work on. So it increases your overall production, and it also lowers your rejection rate. If you go to your branded production screen, you see projected reject rate, and I tried lowering all of these under 10% through the years. But ultimately, when you're producing so much, the rejection rate just kind of got lost. In the early years, it was more important because we had little cash and we had small factories and we were trying to meet demand. Once our factories got so big, the rejection rate really didn't matter so much. It was just about trying to get as much shoes out there as possible. Sticking with the production facility screen, you were allowed 2 options, which I actually didn't know at the beginning. I missed that in the instructions. Because ultimately I was going to try and do all 4 of these options, but you were only allowed 2. And option D here actually lowered our, it increased our production rate and lowered, I think also lowered our rejection rate as well. So these two were pretty big for those two factories. They greatly increased our production. As you can see right here, our workforce productivity is high in those two regions compared to North America and Asia. And that's a direct result to this option right here, option D. Now, I chose these options when it got cheap enough to purchase, because in the early years it was very expensive, but I purchased these, I think maybe year 3 or 4, when the purchase price was a little bit less. These two options here, the rejection, purchase of special equipment to reduce rejection rate. That option was pretty cheap early on, so I chose it just to, I probably wouldn't do that again. In fact, if I were to play this game again, I probably wouldn't choose any of these options until the middle of the game. And it would basically be on whatever I needed in terms of strategy. This is where you would purchase additional factory space. This is where everyone else was going crazy. They were buying space left and right. If we're going to write about the mistakes that we made, and if it's correlates to whatever section you're writing about, one of the big mistakes that we made was in year, I think, 12 or 13. Let me see if I can bring it up. 12 or 13. Let's see. I think it was year 13. Okay, it was actually year 12. I thought it was later than that. But this is where I think was one of the biggest mistakes early on. Originally, I was going to purchase equipment, 1,000 in Europe and 1,000 in Latin America. But I noticed that it was actually more money. See, the equipment upgrade here was 24,000 for 2,000 pairs. It was actually, I think, 36 in Latin America or Europe for the same amount. So I actually thought that had to do with these options that were purchased up here. The one that says done, option B. So I purchased option B in North America and Asia, and so in North America and Asia, factory space was actually cheaper, and I thought it was related to that. So I was like, oh well, next year I'll expand in Latin America and Europe. Well, actually, this doesn't have anything to do with that. I guess the prices are fixed. The factory space in Europe and in Latin America are just more expensive for some reason. And this ended up being a mistake, because we ended up having 8,000 pair facility in Asia and only 1,000 in Europe and 1,000 in Latin America. If you go to year 13, you'll see that. So you probably go to branded. Like total capacity was 1,200 here and 1,200 there, where the total capacity in Asia was 9,600. So this ended up hurting us for quite a few years, because at this point it didn't make sense to further expand in these two areas, because we just didn't have the overall demand in order to meet the demand. We would have had a lot of surplus if I continued to advance. And the exchange rates also caused that from causes us from expanding in those areas as well. So it ended up being a mistake that we had to get very creative through the years. Towards the end of the years, we actually did expand in these areas, but we had to wait for overall demand to increase, which in the game of BSG, it did increase every year. And they tell you that at the beginning in the instructions, is that each year the overall demand on shoes would increase. So we had to wait for that demand to increase enough where we could finally expand. And if you look at where we are in our very last year, I expanded Europe to 2,000 and expanded Latin America to 4,000. And that was the only other expansion that we did. We could have expanded a little bit further in order to compete more with Company B, which if I could go back to like year 17, year 18, I would have further expanded in both of those regions. So you can put that down as something that we will do in the future. We're going to expand more in Europe and more in Latin America, which we should have probably started a couple of years ago. Private label. So we lived off private label for many years, for essentially from year 11 to year 18, until someone really hurt us. It's the most difficult screen to figure out. In fact, you can see that a lot of our rivals still did not figure it out. All we have to do is go right here. You can see Team A put in a bid for an offer of $75 for 948 pairs. Team C put in an offer for $68 for 658 pairs. You can go back through the years and see that. In fact, Team B actually didn't get into private label until recently. If I go to year 16, looks like they did. They got in there at year 16. Let's see, year 13. Year 13, you see Team F get in on it, but no one else is getting in on private label. So it wasn't until the middle of the game did some of these teams start jumping on board. But as you can see, some teams didn't never figure it out. How many did they sell in year 20? They offered almost 1,000. But the reason is because their offer price is too high. Their offer price is supposed to be $10 or less than this number right here, the wholesale price. And the trick is, you don't know what the wholesale price is going to be. You have to guess what it's going to be. And you guess by what it is from the previous year. The previous year it was 65. Now, I thought it was going to go up. I was predicting that it would go up to 67 or 68. But what did I price it at? I priced it at 50, basically 55. And it went up to 66. So if I had priced this at 56.99, I wouldn't have sold a single pair of shoe. Because you have to be $10 under the industry average wholesale price. And that's why these guys, Team A didn't sell a single pair, and Team C, they did this the whole game. Every year somebody didn't sell a single shoe because they didn't know how to price them. They didn't know that it had to be $10 under. Now the other mistake is the star rating. Even Team B made a mistake here. Their star rating is 4.9. The star rating should be 4.8. So they actually gave up profit margin there. And we got better profit. Not only did we sell more shoes, but we got a better profit margin and we sold it at a higher price. If you look at Europe, they tried to undercut us again in Europe. They sold 1,800 pairs. They were hoping to kill us because they only sold it for $42. Because this is a bidding. This is all the team that has it at the lowest price is going to be awarded more shoes because they're bidding lower. They're offering the shoes for at a lower price, which retailers like. I always sold them at a high price because no one was really bidding against us, so I sold it for as much money as I could get. But eventually Team B caught on to what we were doing. And so they started undercutting us. That's how they killed us in year 19. In Asia, they came in at 47, we were at 50, and they killed us. We ended up having 1,300, 1.3 million pairs sitting in a warehouse. And that's what hurt us in year 19. I made sure that didn't happen in year 20 because I sold just enough pairs that I knew even if they were to sell 2,300, they wouldn't touch us. So they sold more shoes, but they sold it at a far lower price, $10 cheaper than we did, because they were trying to undercut us. I let them undercut us. And they also sold them at a higher. It cost them more money to have at a higher rating. If you go to private label, you'll see here that the minimum, it tells you what the minimum is. This year the minimum is 5, but this changes every year. And the idea is just to get it at 5. So I would increase it just enough to get it to 5. One thing that sucks about this screen is that it works very slow. So let's just pretend that I got this at 4. Now 5.4 is too high. And these numbers affect our numbers over here. So it always makes sure that we got it at exactly whatever number is here. Because if I paid anything more towards it, it actually hurt our profits. And that's something that Team B often... Let's take a look at year 13. This was the year that we got hit with the crazy exchange rates. And you'll see the minimum is 4.6, and I made sure we were at 4.6. And there's our margin over direct costs. We wanted these as high as possible, so I always made sure I could get these as high as I possibly could. And how they get spread out, as you can see, I only have 200 in this region and 200 in that region. Is because our factories are very small in that region. So I would have to send, if I had any extra here, I would have sent it over to Latin America. Now I think in this year I didn't because of the crazy exchange rate for that specific year. If I go to maybe year 14, go to private label, you can see here Latin America, I'm sending from Asia, I'm sending over 1,000 pairs to Latin America. And these are the numbers down here, pairs offered for sale. This is the overall projected demand, 2275. And as you can say, that's what these, whenever you see this red up here, it's saying that you are When you have these red, it means you're trying to take a bigger piece of pie than what's yours. So it's 67% or 77%. I'm basically gambling on the fact that no one else is going to go into private label. So every time we got into red, and every year we were in the red, I was basically taking other people's pieces of pie. And that's why we kept on winning by such a large margin every year, is because no one was doing private label and we were heavy in private label. So hopefully that explains that screen. But certainly you should put that in your papers wherever appropriate, is that we dominated the private label for up until the year 2019. And it's because we knew how to produce our shoes at the correct SQ rating. We always made sure it was a minimum. In fact, we always made sure it was right at the minimum. We never went over and we never went under. And we made sure that our price, this price down here, $39.95, was always going to be $10 less than what the average wholesale price is. The average wholesale price is what was the most important thing when pricing these out. And that was a mistake all of our rivals made for many years, and most of them still made right up until the end. Celebrity endorsement screen, I think pretty much speaks for itself. These contract amounts, they have to pay these celebrities every year. This isn't a one time. They pay this, as you can see, per year, which is crazy. But if you're paying so much here, then if you go over to the wholesale marketing, you can actually pay less in all of this area. And that's something that I didn't account for. I probably should have let Dominic get in on all of this bidding. But I could never imagine that spending this much money on celebrities would allow you to have that big of an impact, because that's just crazy spending to me. But it definitely is what drove them, because you can see that Team E ended up in third place, and it's because of what they were doing with celebrities. And in corporate citizenship, we were never a huge player. We actually did win one celebrity award. I think it was year 18. But I didn't spend too much money in that area. Definitely the celebrities and corporate citizenship, if you know how to use it, it can help you build up your brand, and it helps in later years. So it's kind of like sacrificing some middle ground in order to finish big. But that strategy really didn't work for them, because as you can see, for earnings per share and return on equity, they're based on some type of weighted average annually. Now, I couldn't find what kind of weight they used. Obviously, it was definitely weighted more towards the end, as you can see that their weighted average for Team B was only 4 points behind us. Yet, if you look over the years, we pretty much dominated from year 12 on. And then they only barely beat us out in the past 3 years. So if this was actually an annual, there would be, I think, a bigger difference between these two. So they definitely weighted more towards the end, which help them get a little bit closer to us in that the earnings per share. And the same thing with return on equity. Their return on equity was up to 32, yet as you can see, we had 32. I mean, hell, ours wasn't down to, ours was at 32. In fact, their weighted average, we didn't have 1 year that was less than their weighted average. Our very first year was 32.7. They never even came, their average never came close to our lowest. So it's kind of surprising that they were even 10 points behind us, because we really dominated in return on equity. And somehow this must be driven by sheer revenue. It's the one area that they really beat us out in these last 2 years, is that they generated more revenue, but not necessarily more profit. The last screen here, finance and cash flow. So we took out several loans. We have 4 outstanding loans, and as you can see, I got the bulk of these loans at very low interest rates, while interest rates were low. Interest rates actually over the past 2 or 3 years were higher, even though we had an A+ rating. So I haven't really taken out any large loans in the last few years, because we've had a ton of cash, over 300,000, or 300 million really, for the last 4 or 5 years at least. We never issued stock. Issuing stock would have given us more money. So if I put, let's say, 200 here, you'll see that our ending cash jumped up. So it was one way of getting cash, but we never used that. I always took out loans. And the reason was because I always purchased stock. You can't do both. You can't repurchase stock. I actually can't. I purchased the absolute maximum amount of stock. As you can see, maximum stock I can purchase is none, because I purchased as much stock as we possibly could. Repurchasing stock actually helped drive up our stock price. So I always gave dividends and I always repurchased stock, because both of those numbers drove up our EPS and return on equity. So whenever I had leftover cash, I always used it over here. Credit rating, all of this stuff drives our credit rating. Also, how much we take out in loans. In the early years when we were taking out loans, it was hard to get our credit rating down, because the more loans you take out, the greater risk we're on. But we've had A+ ratings since I think year 2. This interest coverage ratio, the higher the better. I don't know if anyone has to write about this, but I'll cover it just in case. We've always had a very high coverage ratio. So this is a very 62. Well, actually last year we had 48. That's very high. Your debt to assets ratio, this is the lower the better. You generally want to have less than 0.30. So for the last few years it's been right around, I think, like 22, 21, 23, 24. Those are all A+ rating for debt to asset ratio. And risk of default, we've been at low throughout, I think, almost the entire game. And that was one of the things that Company B, they were always at medium risk, even towards the end, which I think hurt them. at the end because they really needed to do well in all areas. They didn't have any loans out, I don't think, so I'm not sure what they were doing that caused them to have a low rating. So I can't offer you anything on that in terms of rival information. The most important screens really to pay attention to were the wholesale marketing, was this operating profit margin was the easiest way to keep track of how you were going to do in that year's run. The higher the profit margin, the higher these numbers went up. So I always try to keep these, if I could get this into around the 30% and still sell a lot of shoes, because that's the other thing, is you do want to, you want to sell all of the shoes that you can produce. And since I was able to keep dumping a lot of our shoes into the private label area, I was able to maintain high profit margins in both internet and wholesale. But that changed towards the end when Team B started to sell shoes in both private label and sell a lot of shoes in. They really opened up their market share in wholesale. So that forced us to start being more aggressive in wholesale and internet in order to keep them from selling so many shoes. They basically became like the Walmart. They were selling a lot of shoes at a low price, and they had huge market share. And so we had to curb that in order to keep them at bay. Obviously, in the next 3 years, we would have to change that. In fact, what we would probably do is start going after celebrities. It didn't make sense to do that in our final year because getting celebrities doesn't do anything in the current year. So if I were to bid on celebrities and win them, that would do nothing for us in this current year. See, our celebrity appeal for this current year is 0. So any celebrities we would get wouldn't help us till the following year. So it would not have helped us to get any celebrities in year 20. In fact, it might have actually hurt us because I think it hurts your cash. Our cash down here, I think, would have been less because I think one of the first things they do is they take right off the top any money that you owe celebrities. It takes it from their cash. So I think I went over every screen, and hopefully you understand how they're all interconnected. If you have any questions, let me know.